They threw my grandmother into a thunderstorm minutes after stealing her house, and my mother just watched. Hi, I'm Brielle. I grew up in a family where silence wasn't peace, it was obedience. But the night they tossed the woman who raised me out like garbage, something inside me snapped. Have you ever watched the people you're supposed to trust most destroy someone you love and act like it was nothing? Tell me, if justice had a voice, would yours be loud enough? Let's go back to the night everything broke and I stopped being quiet. She's dying soon. Stop wasting money on her. My father's voice sliced through the polished air of the living room, sharp and effortless. It wasn't a shout. That would have been easier to accept. No. It came out calm, like a financial decision he'd already rehearsed. My mother didn't flinch. She just sat there, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the marble floor like it had answers she didn't. The rain slammed against the windows in waves. I stood near the doorway, one hand on the frame, the other clenched so tight my nails bit into my palm. Across the room, my grandmother, Miriam, sat still, small, fragile. In her hands, she held a chipped white teacup, the one I remembered from every childhood memory. She used to pour peppermint tea in it for me when I couldn't sleep. Now, her fingers trembled around it like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I don't understand, she said quietly. Why now? Maxwell didn't even look at her. We're simplifying things, Mother. It's just paperwork. A legal formality. It's my house, she whispered. And you're 82. You've had a good life. His voice didn't waver. It carried the same tone he used when firing an employee. I looked to Geneva, my mother, silently pleading for her to say something. Her gaze slipped sideways, like eye contact might make her complicit. She said nothing. I don't agree with this, I finally said, my voice low but clear. Maxwell turned to me, his stare the same one I'd seen since childhood, cold, disapproving. Brielle, don't make this dramatic. She's going to sign it. I moved toward my grandmother. You don't have to. You don't owe them anything. But Miriam, she smiled at me, soft and broken. It's okay. He's my son. That shattered something inside me. Before I could speak again, she picked up the pen. Her hand shook as she signed the deed over to him. I heard the pen scratch against the paper like it was cutting something alive. Maxwell scooped up the documents with surgical precision. Then he stood, walked to the front door, and opened it wide. The rain howled through the hallway like a warning. Goodbye, Mom, he said and stepped aside. She hesitated only a second. With her teacup in one hand and a small suitcase in the other, she stepped out into the storm. Not a single soul moved to stop her. For one awful moment, I didn't either. Then I snapped. I ran past my father, shoving the door fully open and rushing into the rain. Miriam stood on the steps, soaked through within seconds. Her shoulders hunched, her lips pressed together in something that looked like shame. Grandma, I said, reaching for her suitcase. They said I'm a burden now. Her voice was barely audible over the thunder. You're not, I said. I wrapped my arm around her thin frame, turned my back to that cursed house, and led her across the street to my apartment. Inside, the air was thick with silence. My place was small, 2 rooms and a kitchenette, but it was warm and mine. I peeled the soaked coat from her shoulders. Her nightgown clung to her like tissue paper. I wrapped her in my best blanket and sat her down on the couch. She still held the chipped teacup in her lap. I'll make tea, I muttered, more to myself than her. The kettle hissed on the stove, the sound oddly violent in the quiet space. I glanced at her. She looked smaller than I remembered, curled in my blanket, water dripping from her hair. But her hands, still wrapped around that teacup, were steady now, as if holding on to that memory gave her more strength than any of us had. When I brought the tea over, she didn't speak. She just looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. I placed the cup in her hands. It's peppermint, just like always. She took a slow sip, her fingers brushing mine. Thank you. I sat beside her, every muscle locked in place. My mind churned, images overlapping, my father's face, my mother's silence, the way the rain had swallowed her whole on those steps. Her voice broke the quiet. I remember when you were little you used to fall asleep on my chest. You'd cry if I tried to move you. I smiled, but it hurt. I remember that too. They think I'm useless now. Her voice cracked. I didn't respond. I just looked at her. And in my silence, something inside me hardened. They'll learn what a burden can do, I said, my voice barely more than a breath. She looked up at me, and for the first time all night, there was a flicker of light in her eyes. She fell asleep not long after. I tucked the blanket tighter around her, then stood at the window. Across the street, Maxwell's porch light was still on, glowing like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just thrown his own mother out like garbage. The next morning, the hospital bill arrived, $2, $9.70 for emergency care, diagnostics, and overnight monitoring. I checked my bank balance. $604. I sat down at the table, the bill in my hand, the kettle cold behind me. This is only the beginning, I whispered. If they stole her house while she's alive, what will they do once she's gone? That question wouldn't leave me. It hung in the air as I sat next to Grandma Miriam's hospital bed, the rhythm of her heart monitor soft but insistent behind me. The ER nurse had just explained she had a mild heart attack, likely from stress and exposure. I already knew that. I'd seen it in her eyes the moment we stepped inside my apartment. Something had collapsed in her. Now, in the quiet, sterile light of the hospital room, a nurse handed me a plastic bag containing her belongings. She came in with these, she said gently. Inside were a few personal items, a hairbrush, a bottle of peppermint oil, her chipped teacup, and a folded red scarf. That scarf. The same one she'd sewn for me years ago, when I lost the original. I remembered it vividly. I was 9, sobbing in a corner closet, devastated that I'd lost the only thing she'd ever made for me. She'd held me close that night and whispered, "What matters most is what you hide closest to your heart." I clutched the scarf now, eyes burning. I didn't know why, but I brought it home. That night, while Grandma rested in the hospital and the rain returned like a bad habit, I found myself standing in front of the washing machine, tossing her things in. When I picked up the red scarf, something fell off. The stitching along the inner hem was thicker than it should be. I examined it closer, fingers running along the edge until I found a ridge, something sewn inside. With trembling hands, I took out a small pair of sewing scissors, snipped carefully along the seam, and tugged. A tightly folded slip of yellowed paper emerged. I stared at it for a long time before I even moved. Then I opened it, and the breath left my lungs. It was a will. A real one. Dated 8 months ago. Signed, witnessed, and notarized. And it left everything, house, assets, accounts, to me. My knees buckled slightly as I sank into the kitchen chair. I read every word 3 times. Then I pulled out my laptop, scanned it with shaking hands, and sent it straight to the only person I could trust right now, Noelle Hart, a legal aid attorney I'd met once through work. I didn't even explain. The subject line read, "Need this verified. Urgent." Within an hour, she responded, "If verified, this changes everything." Before I sent the email, I paused. I needed confirmation, legal, definitive. I dialed Noelle Hart directly. She picked up on the second ring. "Brielle? I just sent you a scan," I said. "From a will. Handwritten, signed, notarized. 8 months ago." She was quiet for a second. "Can you come in tomorrow? Bring the original. I want to see it with my own eyes. This isn't just probate anymore. This is exploitation. Will you help me?" Her voice was steady. "I already am." I nodded, though she couldn't see it, and ended the call. Just hearing her speak so plainly gave me more strength than I expected. It felt like the first moment someone was actually on my side. As I stood near the sink, rinsing the teacup, I noticed the light in the kitchen had shifted. Earlier it had been cold, distant. Now it looked almost golden. I turned off the faucet, staring as sunlight pushed faintly through the blinds, brushing over the scarf I'd laid out to dry. It was subtle, but the contrast caught me, like the house itself was breathing differently.
Ding.
My phone buzzed again, this time a notification from Facebook. Geneva. A new post. She's isolating mom. We're worried for Miriam's health. She refuses all visits. Please keep us in your prayers. I stared at it, disbelieving. I turned to the sink, hands moving on autopilot. The chipped teacup was still there, waiting to be washed. I picked it up carefully, rinsing it under warm water, brushing away invisible remnants. As the water ran, I glanced back at the screen. The post already had 30 comments.
Sympathy.
Concern. Praise for their strength. They hadn't spoken to Miriam since the night they threw her out. And now they wanted prayers? Enough. Later that night, I sat at the foot of Miriam's hospital bed, just as visiting hours ended. She stirred again. Her hand found mine, feeble but purposeful. Is it raining again? She whispered. No, I said softly. It's quiet now. Her eyes opened, just enough. Don't let them decide. I pulled out my old phone and hit record. Her voice was fading, but those words, I needed them to live somewhere beyond this room. When I got home, I played it back. Don't let them decide. That phrase played in my ears as I opened my laptop and typed those final words in the email. Let's make sure the world remembers it too. I found the clip from earlier at the hospital, where she'd stirred briefly and spoken more. I told him no. Miriam's voice trembled. I said I wanted you to have it.
He said it didn't matter.
That I wasn't family anymore. That I was in the way. Her breathing was uneven, weak. I remember signing my real will. I swallowed the lump in my throat. My thumb hovered over the share button.
No.
Not yet. I exported the audio, attached it to a new email addressed to Maxwell. Subject: check your inbox. The cursor blinked.
Send.
Seconds passed. Then my phone rang. Maxwell. I stared at the screen. I answered. His voice was ice. Don't dig graves you can't lie in, Brielle. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. I hung up, then walked to the kitchen wall and pulled out the old city map. I drew a red circle over the courthouse and pinned it with a pushpin. I was done playing nice. I sent them the truth, and I hoped it would hurt more than any lie ever could. I clicked send, and for a moment, the world went still. The soft hum of the fridge, the tick of the clock, even my own heartbeat seemed to hold its breath. I stared at the screen. 2 emails. One to Noel Hart. One to Maxwell Kincaid. Subject: check your inbox. Attached, a scanned copy of the will and the audio file. The will was clear. The signature real. The notarization flawless. But it was the voice file that mattered more. Miriam's voice, weary but steady, saying, I told them no. I said I wanted Brielle to have the house. He said I was dying. That I was just in the way. I remembered writing my first scholarship essay when I was 17. My father read it and tossed it aside. Don't waste time chasing fairness. It doesn't pay. That night I believed him. Not anymore. At the same time, across town, in a home filled with silence and LED lighting, Maxwell opened his laptop. He saw my name in the subject line and clicked. The first thing he heard was his own voice. You're dying, mother. That house is your only worth. He froze. Then Miriam's voice. You promised you'd care for me. And again his. I said what you needed to hear. He stood, slammed the laptop shut, and hurled it across the room. The screen cracked against the wall. Geneva, he shouted. She emerged from the hallway, robe pulled tight around her. What happened? She's bluffing. She has nothing else. His voice was shaking, but his hands were fists. She thinks this makes her dangerous? Geneva didn't answer. Not right away. Back in my apartment, I leaned back in the chair, my body still, my mind racing. The light was warm around me, casting shadows that felt like allies instead of threats.
My phone rang.
Geneva. I didn't want to answer, but I did. Brielle, she said, her voice soft, sugary. I just saw the email. Look, I know you're upset, but this is a family matter. I said nothing. You're emotional. Don't ruin your life over a phase. You've always had potential. Don't throw it away to be a hero. Still silent. You know how your father gets. He's just under pressure. I hung up. Seconds later, another email arrived. From Noel. We're moving fast. Emergency injunction filed. This gets real now. I smiled. Not because it was over, but because it had finally started. The next day, word came from the courthouse. Maxwell's access to all accounts connected to Miriam's estate was frozen, pending investigation. The legal order was crisp and cold. He received it hand-delivered at his office. He held the envelope like it might bite him. Opened it slowly.
Read.
Then he exploded. Who let her do this? She's just a paralegal. The room went quiet. No one answered. His legal team exchanged glances. His assistant pretended not to hear. Maxwell looked around for support and found none. That night, back in my apartment, I printed the court notice, pinned it to the wall with a red thumbtack. My first trophy. The next morning, I met Noelle at her office, a narrow space cluttered with legal briefs and coffee-stained folders. She closed the door behind me and gestured for me to sit. You brought the original? She asked. I handed over the will, my fingers brushing the edges one last time. Noelle examined it under a desk lamp, nodding as her eyes scanned the lines. Handwriting's consistent. Signature is strong. Notarization is legitimate. You have something real here, Brielle. And we're not waiting. Her tone wasn't just professional. It was protective. I know I'm just a paralegal, I said quietly. Noelle looked up. Not to me. You're the whistleblower in a case of elder fraud. And that makes you the most dangerous person in this room. It was the first time I felt like someone saw me not as a girl who overreacted, but as a force. Later that night, as I sat back in my apartment, I noticed how the warmth of the kitchen light fell over the table. It contrasted sharply with the cold glow I remembered from Maxwell's house, the kind that only made things look clean, not feel safe. Meanwhile, Geneva was typing. Her hands shook only slightly as she uploaded a photo of me and Miriam at the hospital. Caption: We're concerned. She refuses visits. Please pray for Miriam. Within minutes, the comments came pouring in. She looks cold. Poor Geneva. Why would she do this to her grandmother? Geneva watched the numbers climb, then began deleting comments, quietly scrubbing the narrative. But it was too late. This wasn't a story she could edit. As I stared at the screen, I whispered the words out loud, slow, like a vow. This doesn't stop until it ends. They called me a thief, so I handed the judge the truth they buried. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, but in atmosphere, an engineered chill that came not from air conditioning, but from anticipation. There were cameras along the side walls, news reporters with steno pads, and silent recorders. It was public. Intentionally so. Maxwell and Geneva entered together, both dressed in charcoal gray like they were headed to a memorial, not a hearing. Their lawyer trailed behind them, a man who looked like he billed by the breath. Geneva's face trembled slightly under a layer of perfect makeup, while Maxwell didn't blink. His eyes scanned the room like a general mapping terrain. I walked in with Noelle. No camera flashed at our arrival. No lawyer entourage. Just the two of us, and what I carried folded in my leather case. Don't flinch, Noelle whispered as we Saturday. You already have everything you need. As the session began, Maxwell's team moved first. Their strategy was sleaze in a suit. The lead counsel raised a heavy binder, said it loudly on the podium, and announced, "We have compelling medical evidence that Ms. Miriam Kincaid was cognitively impaired at the time any alleged will was created. This is backed by a statement from a licensed physician, Dr. Alan Greaves, who reviewed the case remotely." Remotely. Noelle arched a brow. Then Geneva stood, perfectly timed. Her voice shook just enough. She wasn't well. We weren't trying to steal from her. We were trying to protect her from herself. I clenched my jaw. Noelle stood, calm and deliberate. "Your Honor, we also have medical testimony. But we'll begin with the document." She walked forward and handed a copy of the notarized will to the judge. This was signed 8 months prior, under full mental capacity. Verified and on record. There was a low murmur from the gallery. But Noelle wasn't finished. "We also have something more personal." She looked at me. I stood. The courtroom quieted. With slow, deliberate motion, I pulled the red scarf from my case. Time felt like it bent. I unfolded the scarf, fingers steady, and removed the folded parchment tucked inside the lining. "This was hidden in something only she and I knew," I said. "She made this scarf for me when I was 9. She trusted me with what mattered most." I handed the document to Noelle, who passed it to the judge. Then she pressed play on the screen monitor in front of the bench. Miriam's voice filled the room. "I'm not confused. My son wanted the house. I said no. But he took it anyway. I made another will. I left everything to Brielle. She's the only one who stayed." The room held its breath. Geneva's face began to fall, an expression crumbling in real time. Maxwell's jaw tightened like stone. The judge glanced over the documents again, then leaned into the microphone. "Given the evidence presented and the clarity of the witness testimony, all current claims from Mr. Kincaid are hereby suspended pending further criminal review." He struck the gavel once. Silence. Maxwell stood suddenly. "This is manipulation." The judge didn't flinch. "This is due process," he replied. "And you're under scrutiny." Geneva sank into her chair, eyes fixed on the floor. As the room stirred, an elderly man in the front row leaned forward and gently patted my hand. "She would be proud," he whispered. Reporters surged near the front steps as I walked out of the courtroom, but this time, I didn't lower my head. I didn't hide. The sun caught the edge of the red scarf still folded in my hand. The gavel's echo hadn't fully faded when murmurs swelled again inside the courtroom. The reporters' pens moved faster now, whispers laced with disbelief, and heads began to turn, not toward Maxwell, but toward me. I felt the shift like a pressure system breaking. All my life, silence had followed me like a shadow. Now, the silence belonged to them. The judge nodded toward the bailiff, motioning to clear the exhibits. I stayed in place, hand still resting on the scarf. Geneva's eyes met mine, just for a moment. There was no defiance in her anymore, just the wide-eyed panic of a woman watching her world shrink in public view. I remembered how she used to tell me to smile more. Now she couldn't even hold her own expression together. Across from me, Maxwell's lawyer bent close, whispering furiously. Maxwell didn't look at him. His eyes were on me. Cold. Focused. But for the first time, uncertain. I turned away. Outside the courtroom, camera shutters clicked like applause. Reporters began shouting questions, but Noelle held up one hand and said simply, "We'll let the evidence speak." I didn't flinch. For once, I didn't need to. Down the courthouse steps, an elderly woman I didn't recognize approached quietly and touched my sleeve. "She would be proud," she said gently, then disappeared into the crowd. That moment rooted me. My heels hit the pavement with intention now. Geneva was already retreating into the back seat of a black sedan, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses. The act was still alive, but the audience had changed. I spotted Maxwell by my car, just as I knew I would. He looked smaller now, not in stature, but in presence. A man trying to pull strings that no longer reached. "You've just made an enemy," he growled. I stared at him for a long second. "Then you're finally telling the truth." His fists clenched, but no one came to his defense. One of his folders had spilled during his approach. Legal printouts and glossy photos fluttered at his feet. He waited for anyone to pick them up. They didn't. Not even Geneva. He bent to gather them himself, cursing under his breath. The cameras didn't miss it, and neither did I. They took her house for power, so I turned it into something they could never own. The key was heavier than I remembered. Not physically, but with memory. I stood on the porch for a long moment before sliding it into the lock. The door groaned open like it was exhaling a truth long held. Dust floated in sunbeams. The air smelled of old cedar and silence. I stepped into what once held birthdays, bedtime stories, and betrayal. The floor creaked under my boots. Each step was like walking through layers of memory, both warm and jagged. I remembered her voice, once so calm as we trimmed the lilies. "A home isn't walls. It's what you plan around it." That day, I decided I wouldn't just take the house back. I'd take back the meaning. Across town, Geneva sat in a news studio, perfectly framed under soft lighting. She wore blue, the color of contrition. Her voice trembled as she said, "I didn't know what Maxwell was doing. I was manipulated. I'm heartbroken for Miriam and for Brielle, but the internet never forgets." Within minutes, old screenshots of her accusing me of isolating grandma flooded the comments. "Is this you?" One user posted with a clip of her Facebook smear campaign. "Manipulated? You nodded when she was thrown out." Another wrote, "I didn't have time for that. I was in the backyard, gloves on, sleeves rolled. The soil was stubborn, but I dug anyway." With every scoop, I felt something break loose.
Guilt. Pain.
Years of silence. I replanted the lilies, each bulb a quiet apology, each bloom a defiance. Inside, I opened drawers carefully. The chipped teacup went on the windowsill. Her old radio still worked. A familiar hum filled the rooms. I placed one of her scarves on the armrest of her favorite chair. Noelle called. "You sure about this?" "Yes," I said. "This house isn't mine. Not anymore." I walked to the local community center the next day and said the words out loud for the first time. "I want to donate the house, not for profit, but for purpose." They looked at me, stunned. Then they nodded. Ada's house was born. It didn't happen overnight. The walls needed painting, the roof patching. But I wasn't alone. Neighbors came. People I hadn't seen since high school. Even a retired contractor showed up with tools and a quiet smile. We worked in rhythm. Painted walls. Scrubbed floors. Framed old pictures of Miriam and mounted them in the hall. Someone found a red scarf in a donation box and hung it over the front door. No one said why. No one needed to. On the day of the opening, I stood out front. No microphones. No stage. Just a small sign. Ada's house, a shelter for elders who are forgotten. I cut the ribbon. Flashbulbs went off, not in frenzy, but reverence. Inside, a man in his 70s, one of the first residents, found me in the hallway. He squeezed my hand and said, "Your grandmother gave you roots. You gave us shelter." Outside, the scarf over the door moved gently in the breeze. Meanwhile, Geneva was losing control. She went on a second talk show, this time angrier. I was lied to. My husband made me complicit. But no one cared. The comment section read like a courtroom. You let it happen. You helped cover it up. You abandoned your own mother-in-law. Maxwell tried harder. Threatened to sue me for defamation. No one returned his calls. His bank accounts were frozen. His reputation rotted in headlines. From power broker to pariah, one article said. That night, Back at Ada's house, I found a letter hidden under a dusty planter. My name was on the front. Inside, Grandma's handwriting wavered but clear. Thank you for staying. Thank you for being brave when I couldn't. I didn't cry. I smiled. As I walked home, my phone buzzed. It was Noelle. Message. State prosecutor approved indictment. Charges. Elder exploitation, fraud, conspiracy. Formal. I stopped walking, looked up at the night sky, and whispered, "It's almost done." In the following weeks, the house began to breathe again. The sound of paint rollers on faded walls became a rhythm. Hammers tapping, old wallpaper peeling, laughter in between dust clouds. People brought snacks, music, and stories about their own elders. We shared silence, too, those moments when no words were needed, only purpose. One woman hung a picture of Miriam in the hallway, beside an old teacup we found tucked behind the sink. Someone played her favorite tune on the radio, and it echoed across the floorboards. The day before the opening, a local teen spray-painted a mural on the side wall, subtle but powerful. It read, "You don't erase love by erasing presence." Meanwhile, Geneva stepped into a local grocery store. It was a normal afternoon. She wore her usual pearls, sunglasses, and the same expression she used when pretending to be polite. But this time, no one smiled. The cashier scanned her items silently. A woman in the next aisle turned away. A young girl whispered to her mother, "Is that the lady from the video?" Geneva dropped her receipt on the way out. No one handed it to her. She left quickly. Later that evening, I returned alone to Ada's house. The rooms were quiet, filled with new furniture and old memory. I knelt near the base of a potted plant, pulling a few weeds, when my hand brushed something soft. A folded piece of cloth. Inside, another envelope. It was her handwriting. "Dear Brielle," it read. "If you're reading this, then you've stayed. Thank you for standing where others ran. Thank you for planting where others burned." The letter ended with a simple line. "You're not alone anymore." I pressed it to my chest. I wasn't. They built their legacy on silence, so I made sure the world heard everything. The courtroom was packed but quiet. Even the reporters lining the walls seemed to hold their breath. I sat still, not out of fear anymore, but out of resolve. The judge's voice cut clean through the stillness. Maxwell Kincaid, guilty of elder exploitation, fraud, and conspiracy. Sentenced to 6 years in state prison. I didn't look at him, but I heard his breath hitch. A sound I'd never heard from my father before. Not when he yelled. Not when he won.
But now.
Geneva Kincaid, the judge continued. You are sentenced to 2 years of supervised probation and ordered to pay restitution to Ada's house. Geneva's face fell. She didn't protest. She just stared at her hands, like she couldn't recognize them anymore. She tried not to meet my gaze, but when she did, it wasn't anger. It was regret. Too late. I remembered something then. I was 15, standing in the cold outside our house, my bag in hand after another shouting match. Geneva had called me disrespectful, ungrateful, told me to leave. I had nowhere else to go. But I walked to Grandma's porch. She opened the door without asking anything and just pulled me inside. She said only one thing that night. You don't owe them your silence. That sentence lived with me longer than any apology Geneva never gave. Outside, headlines bloomed across every screen. Granddaughter turns betrayal into legacy. Justice for Miriam. My inbox flooded with interview requests. I didn't respond to any of them. Some stories don't need more voices. Just truth. Geneva exited the courtroom slowly. Her heels tapped across the marble floor, echoing like the final ticks of a clock. No one called her name. No one met her eyes. Even the press stayed quiet. She disappeared through the courthouse doors like a shadow that no longer mattered. That afternoon, I went to visit Grandma. The cemetery was quiet, framed by gentle wind and soft sun. I knelt down at her grave. Her name etched simply. Her impact impossible to contain in stone. I placed the red scarf, now framed behind glass, at the base. "You're free now," I whispered. "And so am I." As I stood, I felt no weight in my chest, no rage in my breath. Only stillness. Only peace. When I returned to Ada's house, a new resident had just arrived. An older woman with silver curls and eyes like open skies. I guided her gently. "This way. You can choose any room you like." She smiled warmly. I poured her tea, just like Grandma used to for me. The same gesture, the same scent. But this time, it was mine to offer. A volunteer passed by and smiled. "You didn't just fight back," he said. "You built something better." I nodded, but didn't speak. I didn't need to. Later that day, a little girl came in with her grandmother. As they walked past the hall, the girl pointed to the red scarf in the glass frame. "What's that?" I knelt beside her. "It's where justice lives," I said. She didn't understand, but one day she would. Meanwhile, at Ada's house, sunlight spilled through clean windows. The smell of cinnamon and tea floated from the kitchen. A group of volunteers hung a handmade sign in the main hallway, simple lettering, "Belonging lives here." That evening, Maxwell sat alone in a correctional facility. A small television mounted to the ceiling played a muted news segment. His name crawled across the ticker. His face filled the screen. He didn't react, just stared. The sound was off, but the message was deafening. At my desk in the office upstairs, I opened Grandma's old notebook and a fresh one of my own. I began writing down everything she used to say. Every small rule, every piece of wisdom she left behind, not just for me, but for the people who'd walk through Ada's house next. I labeled the new binder, Miriam's Guidebook. Each page was a seed. Each word was a foundation. This wasn't just the end of their story. It was the beginning of ours. As the sun dipped low, I stepped out onto the porch. The wind moved through the trees gently, tugging the scarf hung above the doorway just slightly. It danced, just enough to catch the last light of day. And I looked forward, straight ahead, not just toward the garden or the road, but toward everything ahead. And this time, I won't be quiet. I finally live in peace, not just in a house reclaimed, but in a life no longer defined by silence. Justice didn't come easy, but it came, and I carry it like a quiet victory. Sometimes, standing up means losing everything before you gain anything. But the truth, no matter how buried, will always find its voice. And when it does, it changes everything, especially you. Have you ever been forced into silence by people who should have protected you? Share your story below. Let's break the silence together. And if you've ever wondered what real justice looks like, maybe it begins right here.